Well, another week of OHL action is in the books, and we are here to talk about all of it. My name is Mike Farwell. That guy over there is Dan Mahar. And I think, Dan, it's only appropriate as we start this week's episode if we take a moment for Nick Lardis.
Yeah, and a moment's all he needs for 2 to 3 goals, Mike. So
I mean, even in an 11-2 win over Saginaw, which is how Brantford finished their weekend on Saturday, you would have thought he was in for more than 2 or 3, but he gets 2, and that takes him to 70 on the season. And Nick Lardis becomes one of only 8 players ever in OHL history to have a 70-goal season. He's up there now with the likes of Eric Lindros, John Tavares, and Doug Gilmour. That, my friend, is elite company.
yeah, NHL Hall of Famers all on that list, right? So when you're in the company of only NHL Hall of Famers, that bodes well for your future, I would say.
It certainly seems as though Lardis will pass Tavares's 72 goals from 06-07. And if he does that, he will be the highest scoring single season OHLer since 1980-81. So more than 40 years ago. Enjoy it, Bulldogs fans. Enjoy it, OHL fans, even as Lardis keeps getting those goals against your team, because this sort of thing obviously doesn't come around all that often. You know, Dan, also, you and I got to finish off our weekend at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium watching the Rangers take on the Storm. And I got to say, for a 10th place team, the Storm put on quite a push in the third period to make a game of it. They were down 3-0 after 2. It finishes 4-3 for Kitchener. And on top of it all, you got to run into Andrew at the game, who's a fan of the podcast. Love to hear that.
Yeah, great to meet you today, Andrew. A fan from Guelph, Kitchener fan, and he treated to a pretty good game today between the Storm and the Rangers.
The loyalty in this league continues to amaze me. We do a thing on our radio broadcasts called the long distance listener, because with technology today, fans, listen to a game online from their vacation spot. I've had people from cruise ships messaging in, and we got a message from Carol this weekend, who now lives in Ottawa, but had spent 50 years as a season's ticket holder in Kitchener, moved to Ottawa a couple of years ago, likes to keep up with the Rangers by listening to games online. And now, of course, she'll go to TD Bank Place Arena in Ottawa when the Rangers are there just one time every season, wearing her Rangers gear. And she says it feels a little bit like home. But after 50 years as a season's ticket holder, she still keeps up with the team from another market.
Yeah, and I love hearing those stories, Mike, because when you look around the stands, you see a bunch of fans that have been there a really long time. And I don't know if you noticed about a week ago at the Ranger game when they were highlighting certain season ticket holders, there was one who had had season tickets since 1966. And then today, I think it was a first-year season ticket holder. So that's your spectrum of fans in the stands. But yeah, once you're hooked, I think.
I don't always get to see what goes on the video board during the game because obviously I have a job to fulfill. But I did notice this past weekend when they recognized the 80th birthday of a longtime fan, Dave. You know him by two things: his big bushy mustache and the flag that he's always waving. And sure enough, the crowd erupts as an ovation to Dave on his 80th birthday. And there he was, still waving the flag at the odd.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. And I don't know how long he's had season tickets for, but I sure remember him from promo videos back when the Rangers were hosting the Memorial Cup and when they won it. So 15, 20 years ago. So Dave's a mainstay there as well.
Some news to talk about, of course, in the Ontario Hockey League this week. Discipline, I think, being the key word. We'll get to Erie-Peterborough in just a bit. But let's start, Dan, with Cam Allen. As we all know, several weeks ago, charged with impaired driving, has to go through the court process. The league suspends him indefinitely. As that plays out, it has all now played out. Cam Allen pleads guilty to one charge. There were several, but the others dropped as he pleads guilty to impaired driving. He gets his sentence from the courts, which includes some community service, a many $1,000 fine, and a driving suspension. And now the league says, okay, Cam Allen, you've done that part of this process. Now you are eligible to return to the Ontario Hockey League on March the 16th, which is when the London Knights play in Windsor, as long as you meet some criteria, which includes going through some counseling and a program that will help him toward, proving that he's ready to play and he's gone through these steps and do some hockey community service as well. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, Mike, I had a lot of people ask me when it first happened, how long is he going to be? He's not going to be allowed to play again, right? And I figured he'd be back again this year. Obviously, a serious offense. There's kind of two sides to this. You know how we feel about drunk driving and the crime itself, and zero tolerance, not much respect for that whatsoever. On the flip side, had a couple people reach out and say, is he back just because he's a London Knight? Did they pull the strings and ignore it? I think, if you're one of those people, you might want to check into the court systems and how they handle these things in general. I'd say they're too soft for everyone. It's not a London Knights thing. It's not special treatment. First-time offenders often don't get the book thrown at them. And quite frankly, pleading guilty is looked fondly upon by the courts, which Cam Allen did. So I would say all in all, this doesn't surprise me that he's coming back, assuming he takes care of the steps you mentioned. But hopefully he learns from this, because like we said, there was really no excuse for it the first time, and there's never an excuse for it a second time. So hope that's one and done for Mr. Allen, Mike.
I have had very similar conversations on my end of things, Dan, and I would refer back to the first time that we talked about this on the show. And this is, quite frankly, exactly what we predicted would happen, right? Because you and I were in agreement that the drinking and driving laws in this province, in this country, are far too lenient for our liking. But anybody who thought that this would be the end of Cam Allen's junior career or even hockey career doesn't have, as you alluded to, a full understanding of the way the court system works and the way impaired drivers are handled in Ontario or in Canada. And that's not a knock. It's just the reality if you've covered these things to any level. So yeah, if you think this is preferential treatment because Cam Allen plays for the London Knights, I think you're misguided in that regard. And you're probably looking at this through partisan, if I can use that language, not to make it political, but glasses. We know that the London Knights are the team in this league that everybody loves to hate. But just because you don't like the team because it's a good team and often beats your team doesn't mean that the player is getting preferential treatment here. Anybody else that did the same thing that Cam Allen did, particularly for a first offense, as you outlined, Dan, would have had a similar punishment from the court system. And then as soon as they're through the court system, or even in between time, they could have gone back to work, with the possible exception of them being somebody who drives for a living or required to have a driver's license to operate heavy machinery or anything like that. So in that regard, because somebody else might have been able to go back to work while waiting for the court process to play out, Cam Allen might have been even more severely punished because he's a hockey player. It turns out to be a 15-game ban. And as I said, he'll get to come back when the London Knights take on the Windsor Spitfires for the final 4 games of this regular season with the Knights, and then onward into the playoffs. If you want to give Cam Allen the benefit of the doubt, and I think it's fair to do that for a person as young as he is, let's hope, to your point, Dan, that this is a one and done, and he has learned a really valuable lesson here, because there is no excuse, none whatsoever, for drinking and driving in this day and age. That's for sure.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I can't really add any more to that. There's zero excuse. No one's letting him off the hook here. We certainly aren't. Just can't happen. It's bottom line, can't happen. But let's hope the lesson's learned.
The league has been busy this week when it comes to handing out the discipline. As we just mentioned, the league, that is, characterizes the Cam Allen suspension as 15 games. He meets the criteria. He gets to return on March the 16th. The league also came down heavily, I would say, Dan, on the Erie Otters and the Peterborough Petes. We touched on this in the podcast last week because it was fresh. The brawl, if you will, if it's a fight that starts on the ice, it spills over off the ice in between the benches. The coaches want to get at each other. And when all the dust settles, the league has suspended both Chris Millette of the Erie Otters and Rob Wilson of the Peterborough Petes for 5 games each, the head coaches. Ken Paroff, the assistant in Erie, gets a 2-game suspension. Graydon Strohack of the Peterborough Petes gets a 4-game suspension. And the big one is Alex Messier of the Erie Otters, a 9-game suspension. I don't know about you, Dan, but I have heard some saying, oh my goodness, this is another sign of how soft we've gotten as people and as a hockey community. But I'll reserve my comments for another moment here as I ask you for yours on how the league handled the melee at the Erie Insurance Arena.
Actually, I think they more or less got it right. I felt like, the coach, they can't have coaches doing that. No blows were thrown, so maybe five's a little steep. Strohack, I'm fine with. The one I thought might have been a tiny bit lucky to get off the way he did was Alex Messier. And the only reason I say that is came on with clear intent to fight that player. Player was unwilling, did not relent, kept going. Quite a bit of physical interaction with the officials as they were trying to break it up. Did not back off when they asked. A little bit aggressive there. Went after a second player, and then even got involved in the melee off ice. So, for me, the punishments more or less fit the crime. Maybe a bit heavy in most cases, but I think Alex Messier might be happy with 9, Mike, because that could easily have gone sideways when you start potentially abusing officials, going after an unwilling opponent, et cetera, et cetera.
Interesting that you'd be happy with only 9 games, which seems pretty severe from where I'm sitting, but I like the way you describe that. There are really 2 things here, Dan, that disturb me a little bit in the story. One is that we've got a 6'3", 213-pound 19-year-old going after a 5'8", 160-pound 17-year-old. I don't like that aspect of it because as much as fighting is still part of the game, and I will continue to argue that it is, we have arrived in a place where if you don't want to fight, you don't have to, right? The players who are interested in that side of the game, if you will, participate in that side of the game, but there's no unwilling combatants with the way the rules are constructed today. And that's a good thing. And we often also don't have older players getting into dust-ups with younger players. So that part of it concerns me a little bit. And the other thing is, and you alluded to this, even though no blows were exchanged, the head coaches get 5 games each for their roles in this. And look, people of a certain vintage will remember, and I think I alluded to this on the show last week, Pat Burns, Barry Melrose, Toronto Maple Leafs, LA Kings, 1993 Stanley Cup playoffs when they almost got into it behind the bench when Burns wanted a piece of Melrose. A little bit different in the pros than it is in junior. The adults have to be the adults in the room here, and they kind of set the example for the players. So as much as I'm okay with the passion, and by the way, guys, here's a pro tip, especially Erie should know this. That tunnel between the benches leads right to a hallway beneath the stands. You guys can go back there and have it out if you want to. Nobody's going to see you back there. But the adults have to be the adults in the room here. And so I didn't love that aspect of this. I can understand why the league would want to be harsh on it. But to anyone who is saying this is a sign of the softer times, I would push back on that because we shared last week on the show some of our favorite stories of games gone wild in the past. And one of the games that I mentioned back in the mid-1980s from the OHL Game of the Week, where there was a second period brawl between the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds and the Hamilton Steelhawks, 14 fighting majors, 165 minutes and penalties. Oh, and by the way, at the end of it all, Bill LaForge, who was the head coach of the Hamilton Steelhawks, got suspended for the rest of the season. So it was suspended in the mid-1980s. They're suspended in the mid-2020s as well. It hasn't changed a whole lot. It's just that this sort of thing never really has happened a lot. And dare I say, with so many more eyes on the game and so many more ways to talk about it, there's more attention being paid to it. But I don't think things have changed all that dramatically. This sort of thing just doesn't happen a whole lot. So I'll sum it up by saying there are a couple of things I don't like about what happened. I'm not going to lose any sleep over them. And I think the league got it right in assessing the penalties.
Yeah, well, I hate to say we agree fully there because the things that bothered you about this were the things that bothered me about this. But you're absolutely right. Some of the suspensions going back to the 80s and 90s and early 2000s were massive. The league really cracked down on some people for various things. Mike, you might remember going way back, the name Alan Lake kicked out of the league for a kicking incident. So there's lots of I referenced on social media this week the Jeff Kugel incident, for those that remember, where a player on the Windsor Spitfires kind of went nuts and chased players around the ice in a brawl, completely unhinged. But was banned for the rest of that year. And it was partly because trying to fight unwilling opponents, a bigger, older player going after some younger, smaller players, all the elements that we saw here, obviously not the same degree of severity. But you're right, Mike. Those optics weren't great. But I think all in all, it's not soft here. I think the league got it right.
Not soft here. I like what you said there because I just wanted to add, I've been giving this so much thought since last week and some of the back and forth that you and I have been engaged in on social media and elsewhere. Hockey is a beautiful game. It's fast, it's physical, and it's a little dangerous. And I think that's okay. And I frankly, I think the league, I think it does, particularly at the NHL level. And I think we're starting to see that a little more at the junior level. I think it embraces to some degree the inherent danger involved in the game. And sometimes that danger, not just because you're skating around on blades of steel that are literally fractions of an inch thick, like that adds an element of danger that no other major sport can add to its toolkit, if you will. But if you get out of line in hockey, you might get punched in the nose for that. And I think we should, as hockey fans and as hockey people, be okay with that and maybe embrace that side of the game. I know that makes me sound a bit like a Neanderthal, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, Mike, I'm with you on embracing the physicality in the game. I think it's obviously part of the entertainment. Let's go there. But you're right. There are some codes, there are some aspects of the game where the players want to be able to police, and if you step out of line, you'll get reminded and maybe you won't do it again, or maybe you'll think twice. So I think that is part of the game, Mike. That's part of the appeal. And what we're always watching for is when lines are crossed, and that's when the league steps in and the officials step in. But you don't want to take it out entirely. That's for sure.
I think the league is doing a pretty good job of policing the players and policing itself as we head towards the playoffs. And they promise to be an exciting playoffs in the OHL this year. Okay, plenty more to come for you on this week's episode of the OHL podcast, including your weekly wraparound and a spirit defenseman that soars into the OHL history books. Stay with us as we continue this week's episode of the OHL podcast. This NHL season has been as predictable as a puck rolling on its edge. No one knows where it's going, but that just means there's time for your favorite team to figure things out. And games left for you to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. And if you are new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. We love the Ontario Hockey League so much. We want to know what's going on in every market. And we hope that you love it that much too. Whatever market you're listening from, you're going to get a little tidbit of information from that market. And this is a good way of keeping up with the competition too. We call it the wraparound. And Dan, if I've got my things straight this week, you are on Western Conference duty. So you can start us off with the Erie Otters.
Yeah, Mike, and the Erie is going to kick off my theme this week of the playoff picture starting to solidify. And, Erie had a home and home this weekend with Owen Sound, won both ends, pretty much have solidified themselves in that fifth slot, looking almost certain they're running into Saginaw in round one, taking care of business on their end for Erie. Now they're starting to brace for the playoffs. So good on Erie for solidifying their hold in that top five.
Yeah, I thought for a moment that Flint might have a chance to catch him, but you're right. They have stabilized, and it looks like that's how things are going to settle as we come into the final couple of weeks. For me in Barrie, it's once again, he was my prospect of the week last week, and I'm talking about Kayshawn Aitchison and the NHL team that drafts him in the first round in a few months, because they're going to be very happy people. Aitchison's stock continues to rise as that draft approaches in June, as the Colts defenseman tied a franchise record for most goals in a single season by a Barrie blue liner. Aitchison scored his 23rd of the season in a weekend win in the Sioux tying him with Brant Clark and Aaron Ekblad for most in a single season by a Colts defenseman. And also with Barrie, a congrats to Cole Emerton, Barrie's third rounder last spring, who has agreed to a development and scholarship agreement with the Colts. Emerton grew up in nearby Oro Medonte and was a Colts fan as a kid. So it's a bit of a full circle moment for Cole Emerton.
Congratulations to him. Yeah. Continuing with my kind of playoff previewing theme, Mike, like you mentioned, the Flint Firebirds looking to have sixth place locked firmly in their grasp. Can't go up, can't go down. But special congratulations to Sam McHugh for his first 30-goal season with a hat trick against Sarnia, and Caden Petrie 8 points in his last 4 games. The Firebirds starting to show some life as they're looking for a first-round matchup with Kitchener.
McHugh comes back from an 8-game absence with a hat trick. Not bad, eh?
Not bad.
All right. In Brampton, it was a big week for defenseman Finn Harding, who set a new Steelheads franchise record for assists in a season by a defenseman with his 48th. And then he went out and signed his 3-year entry-level contract with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Harding and the Steelheads also clinched a playoff spot this week. Now, goaltender Braden Gillespie caught my eye too, because he picked up his second shutout of the season, both with the Steelheads, and he's done that in just 11 starts. Gillespie also had 2 shutouts career with the Guelph Storm, where he made 101 starts. So, tying into your theme, Dan, Brampton looks pretty much locked into the 5th spot in the East, which will make the battle for 4th all the more interesting, because who wants the Steelheads in the first round? They've won 10 of their past 14, and they've got points in 12 of those 14 games.
I know I don't want them. I'll go on the record with that. So.
I would agree.
Yeah. On the other end of the playoff spectrum, Mike, in Guelph, I was starting to ask myself, are they waving the white flag here? Crucial home-and-home series with Sarnia, and they got spanked by the Sting in both ends of it. Competitive on the first game, but not so much on the second game. And 6 points out, Mike. 8 games to go still, but some tough matchups. Another one with Kitchener, a couple with London. Guelph is on their deathbed. But a couple positives. We mentioned the game Sunday in Kitchener with some positives out of how they battled back in the third period. And I particularly liked a second period shift out of youngsters McLean and Stevens, who really decided they were going to work their tails off that shift, get to the net, make some things happen. Saw the coaches applauding them as they came off, and Guelph got back into the fight, largely on the strength of the kids.
That's a great observation, Dan. And we touched on it earlier. When you might be at a point in the season where you could wave the white flag and you're down 3-0 after 40 minutes to a top team and you battle back the way Guelph did, you're looking for those positives. And that's definitely something to take. In Brantford, we took our moment earlier in this episode for Nick Lardis, so I will leave him out of the wraparound. But I will talk about Patrick Thomas, who is your new Bulldogs franchise leader in points, passing Arthur Kaliev's 248. Thomas picked up 4 points this week, climbing now to 251 to establish the new franchise mark. Now, in fairness, Kaliev racked up his 248 points in fewer than 200 games, but Patrick Thomas is still scoring at more than a point per game in his OHL career, and 39 games and 1 point for none other than Nico Krimpatic, who picked up his first OHL point, a 9th rounder for Brantford back in 2023. And he got an assist in the Bulldogs win last week over Peterborough. And if I can just take a step further, when you're talking about winning, that win over Peterborough, Brantford continues to hold on to first place in the Eastern Conference, thanks to a 2025 that has seen the Bulldogs drop just 4 games in regulation since the beginning of January. That's only 4 regulation losses in the past 29 games, Dan Mahar.
You know, and I'm glad you mentioned Patrick Thomas, Mike, because the shadow of Lardis this year is large, but what a offensive facilitator he has been all year for that team. All right. Switching to Kitchener, Mike, I wanted to point something out. You know, I evaluate teams. I go by the standings of point totals, not division leaders, etc. So Kitchener is the second best team in the OHL right now, statistically. They're the second best team. What I found interesting is this weekend, overager Adrian Mislijevic hit the 30-goal barrier for the first time in his career, bounced up to 63 points, and he is Kitchener's leading scorer, ranking 36th overall in the OHL, Mike. So that is a team, second place overall, that is not getting it done with Nick Lardis's and Liam Greentree's and you name it. They're getting it done by committee. When your top scorer is 36th overall, you don't expect to be in second, but here we are.
Here we are indeed. And, this is something we're going to have to explore in a future episode, I think, Dan, because the seedings, they make me a little bit nuts. I understand you want to have an incentive for winning the division. So, okay, Windsor gets slotted in second and the Rangers 5 points ahead of them are in third. But then when the draft rolls around, Windsor gets to pick before Kitchener. Maybe there needs to be a tweak here.
I'm totally with you on that. I call that concept double dipping. We can't double dip. You can't get the higher seed for playoffs and then a higher seed for the draft. That shouldn't be how it works. I'm with you on that one.
All right. We agree, and we'll see if we can get the OHL to agree at some point down the road. My wraparound now takes me to Kingston, where we find Joey Willis joining the ranks of NHL players under contract. The France forward has signed a 3-year entry-level deal with Nashville. The Preds picked Willis in the 4th round back in 2023. He's got 11 points in 15 games with Kingston since being acquired in a trade with the Saginaw Spirit. And the France, they've been stumbling a little bit, dropping 4 of 5 before closing out the weekend with an overtime win in Niagara. And real quick, if you're watching on our YouTube channel, over my left shoulder here, you'll see a new picture that's been added. I should have put that up a while ago. Charlie, when I met him, I met Charlie and John together after the game in Kingston in mid-February when the Rangers were there. And Charlie gave me an autographed picture of Joey Willis that I have added to my set here for the OHL podcast. And then over my right shoulder, Larry came up to visit me at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium and brought me a beer glass, which is empty. I'm not drinking on the podcast, but it's from the Galt Minor Hockey School where Larry has been volunteering for 25 years now. So cool new items I could add to the podcast set here at the home offices in Kitchener, thanks to Charlie and Larry. But Dan, are you jealous that I've got the autographed picture of Joey Willis or what?
I was just going to say, I accept gifts too to our listeners out there. So oh, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, and moving down the road to London, Mike, big congratulations to Coach Dale Hunter on his 1,000th win in the OHL. That's quite a milestone. Just 154 short of Brian Kilroy for most overall all time. Huge milestone. But also another milestone for one of the kids on that team. Wanted to shout out Jacob Julian for signing his entry-level deal with the Winnipeg Jets, a team whose style he will fit to a T. So congratulations to Jacob and Dale this week.
A not very hot take. In fact, it might be a cold take, Dan, but Dale Hunter will pass Brian Kilroy's mark for most ever OHL coaching wins, and then nobody will ever come close to it again.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd call that a hot take either, because I agree with both those. I think he will do it, and it won't be passed.
Yeah, because you just don't have coaches. Obviously, Dale staying in the league for as long as he does because he owns the team. But that's just not those types of coaches that stick around for decades just aren't around anymore. We're developing coaches to move to the next rank, or we're a little bit, we give them less leash these days, right? So I think, it's not a hot take at all. The record will never be touched once Dale Hunter sets a new record.
No, I mean, 68 game season. You're talking about being a 50 win out of 68 games team for 22 years to get there. Yeah. So I think your math is pretty rock solid there.
Thank you for that. Appreciate you. All right. Niagara is next for me. It's a rookie record too for Brady Wasselin, who passed Pano Femus for most assists ever in a rookie season for an Ice Dog. Wasselin picked up his 31st helper of the season last week to set the new mark. He has since added his 8th goal of the campaign and is coming off a 4-game point streak, now sitting at 39 on the season, which is good for 5th among rookies.
Excellent. Great for him. Up in Owen Sound, Mike, tensions rising in that playoff race. They are life and death for that last playoff spot right now, Mike. Just outside right now with those back-to-back losses to Erie. But under leadership of Landon Hookie, they're plowing along. They have a similar schedule to their competition remaining, I would say, in terms of quality of competition. No head-to-heads with them, though, so they're going to have to do it on their own. and they're going to have to find some of that Owen Sound magic, Mike, because they're not used to missing the playoffs a whole lot. And right now they're a point down, looking up.
If I can piggyback on Owen Sound for just a moment, Dan, I should have mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when Ken sent us the email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com, but it was after the Four Nations face-off, and we were singing the praises of the OHLers who made such a big difference for Team Canada in that win over the U.S., including, of course, most notably, Mitch Marner, Sam Bennett, Connor McDavid. Now, when I was done singing the praises of the players putting up the points, you did mention Jordan Binnington, but maybe didn't get enough love for Ken's liking, who's an Owen Sound fan, and wanted to say, hey, Farwell, you forgot about Jordan Binnington. It's true. Dan was there to pick me up, but maybe not enough love. So here's some extended love for the former Owen Sound attack goaltender, Jordan Binnington. Key part of Team Canada's win, Dan.
Good call, Mike, because Jordan Binnington's performance in that last overtime reminded me of his performances in Owen Sound. So good call.
Great point. And Ken, thanks for the email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. To the gateway of the North I go, and North Bay, where the Battalion have just finished off a brutal stretch of 7 games in 11 days. 5 of them were on the road, and they only went 2-4-1 over that stretch. But now North Bay is into its final 9 games, 6 of which are being played at home in the Bart Longyear Memorial Gardens. Battalion opened this home stretch with wins this weekend over Niagara and Ottawa. They will play Thursday, Friday, and Sunday for the next 2 weeks to close out the season. 4 of the final 6 games at home. You kind of like that schedule. I know head coach Ryan Houlihan does, because he says the Battalion now control their own fate, which they do. They have a 4-point lead over Ottawa for the final playoff spot in the East.
Yeah, what a battle.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, down in Saginaw, Mike, I know we mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but I think it bears repeating for those that didn't hear it. Saginaw defender Zayne Parekh, what a feat. 2 back-to-back 30-goal seasons for a defenseman. First time ever. That's quite an incredible feat, but made even more incredible when you consider he could be back next year. 2006-born player, could do it 3 times. Talk about records that are unlikely to be broken. Well, that's one. And Saginaw, because we're on a positive kick with that, I'm just not going to mention your 11-3 loss the other day. You're going to want to tighten up for the playoffs, but I'm sure Coach Laz has that message for you already, so you don't need it from me.
All right, and more on Parekh is coming up as well, but we'll get to it. Continuing the wraparound right now in Oshawa, where Colby Barlow carried a 4-game point streak into this past week, which included goals number 30 and 31 on the season. Barlow has never had a season, never, in which he's scored less than 30. He picked up 5 points on the 4-game run and now sits at 57 on the season. Meantime, Andrew Gibson, how do you like this? Playing his first OHL game in the Sioux as a visitor, as the Gens knocked off the Greyhounds in a shootout. Gibson, of course, played 145 games on the Sioux blue line before being traded to Oshawa. And Callum Ritchie played 7 games with the NHL's Colorado Avalanche to start this season, even registered his first NHL goal. But Ritchie is now a New York Islander after the Avs dealt the former first rounder at the trade deadline. So there you go.
Not sure about the price they paid either. I mean, I like Brock Nelson, but that was a steep price. So
no kidding.
Sarnia, Mike, what can we say about Sarnia? I was so thoroughly impressed with them for having critical back-to-back with home and home series with the Guelph Storm in that brutal playoff fight. Win at home in a hard-fought 3-1 game, and then go to Guelph and win 5-1. Think great. They showed up when you need them. Turn around, get blasted 6-2 by Flint, and then just absolutely murdered by London. Playing on back-to-backs, I get it. You're tired, but not the effort you like to see all around in the heat of this battle. So likely to hang on to a playoff spot, I think, but not the efforts you want to see in the heat of this race.
In the nation's capital, Chris Barlas picked up his 11th goal of the season in a loss last week to Peterborough, but that gives Barlas a new career high. And he added to it in the same game, giving Barlas now 12 goals and counting for his new career high. With Philip Ekberg, as we continue looking at Ottawa, 3 goals in 2 games was enough to earn him Rookie of the Week honors in the OHL. And one more note from Ottawa, 67's forward Kimi Korbler has returned home to Switzerland to deal with a health-related issue. The import had just 3 points in 39 games this season. And Ottawa, of course, is battling with North Bay, who we mentioned a moment ago, for that final playoff spot in the East.
We wish Kimmy the best with that, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So Mike and Sue, so I love the compete. So here's the thing, they're in that dead heat for that final playoff spot, currently at 1 point up, largely on the strength of a hard-fought home game against those powerhouse Oshawa Generals where they managed to get to a shootout. Could have been easily 2 points. Just before that, a hard luck loss to Barrie where a late goal sunk them again. Sue has an awful lot of those 1 and 2 goal losses this year, but I love that. That shows compete. They're in the games. And here's something for you, Mike. So I love these anomalous stats, but if you look at plus minus for the entire Soo Greyhound roster, everyone is between a high of +5 and a low of -25, which is what you'd expect for a team in 8th, 9th place, except one guy. Draft eligible Brady Martin, Mike, a +21 on that team. And those are the type of anomalous stats that just jump out at me, and I'm sure they're jumping out at scouts as well.
Okay, hang on. Now, you made Brady Martin your prospect of the week on this podcast last week, Dan. We know he hails from Elmira, which is in our beautiful home community, the region of Waterloo. Are you in on the Brady Martin sweepstakes here? Are you got what's going on?
Oh, you better believe it. I'm just going to take a sip from my hopefully picking in the top 10 NHL team that might want to look at Brady Martin. I'm just going to put that out there.
Settle down. You're ridiculous. Okay, I'm going to leave that right there. I can't stand that team whose mug you're drinking from. Although I guess 24 Stanley Cup mugs is worth something. Anyway, Peterborough is where I am at next. And it was a milestone for Pete's captain, Jonathan Mali, who has reached 20 goals in a season for the first time in his career. His previous best was 14 scored last year. The Petes posted back-to-back wins this weekend after having dropped 5 in a row.
Yeah, Mali's been hanging in there. You got to give him some credit.
Certainly has.
So we'll finish up in Windsor, Mike. And again, I'll just round out the theme of the playoffs and how they're looking. Well, we know that Windsor and Kitchener are probably on a collision course for the second round, barring upsets in the first round. So seeing them come head-to-head this weekend was an opportunity to see what it might look like. And the positive for Windsor, got a hat trick out of Nomorno, some zip on those shots he released to beat Jackson Parsons. Ended up dropping the game 7-4, though, so we're not sure if that's a precursor for the playoffs, but it was a good, tight game. But on the heels of a 7-1 bashing of the Kingston Frontenacs by the Windsor Spitfires the night before. So this is a big, skilled team, and they're rounding into form for the playoffs. So we'll see if that head-to-head comes to fruition. But we saw a preview this weekend, Mike.
It wasn't intentional, but we seem to kind of, Dan, have come up with the same theme about playoffs because they're getting so close, I guess. But we hadn't talked about this in advance as I finish off in Sudbury. And I'm wondering if the Wolves are marching to the playoffs because Sudbury has reeled off 4 straight wins since the calendar flipped to March. That includes a win over Niagara, and the Wolves leapfrog the Ice Dogs to take over 6th place in the East. And a stick tap to the Wolves marketing department. I don't know if you saw it this week, but the Wolves were offering a 25% discount on tickets this week to anyone who used the code TARIF when buying their tickets. I don't want to get too political. This is a hockey podcast and it should stay hockey, but come on. 25% tariff. Well done by the Sudbury Wolves marketing team on that one.
Brilliant marketing. And you asked if they were marching to the playoffs. I think they're kind of ziplining to the playoffs. Is that fair?
I would say so. I mean, you turn the calendar to March and they're zipping through the league, right?
Yeah, like that thing on the roof is,
with the wolf that comes out when they score a goal.
The ziplining wolf, yes.
The ziplining wolf as the Wolves zipline to the playoffs. Come for the hockey content, stay for the really bad jokes. That's what we bring you on the OHL podcast. And as we continue this week's episode, he is one of only 10 to ever do it. And your prospects of the week are still to come. So hang on. More bad jokes are also possible as we continue this week's episode of the OHL podcast. Dan, I thought of it when you mentioned Windsor's win over Kingston before they came into Kitchener and lost to the Rangers. And I remember mentioning last week, just as we were wrapping up our recording, the Knights were finishing off their second consecutive 3-in-3 weekend. So on the first of those, they had the Kitchener Rangers on Sunday evening, and the Rangers beat them in London. On the second of those, they had the Oshawa Generals on Sunday evening, and they came from behind to beat the Gens in overtime. But I mentioned to you on last week's podcast, back-to-back 3-in-3s, and then how about the week ahead for the Knights? The Gens on Sunday, the Brantford Bulldogs on Wednesday, and then the Kingston Frontenacs on Friday. So three beasts from the East. And what did the London Knights do but run like a buzzsaw through all three of them? So notice served to all of those Eastern Conference teams. I know you're good. I know you loaded up to pound on one another towards a potential Eastern Conference championship, but those London Knights served notice even without Cam Allen this week.
Yeah, that did they ever. They're getting playoff tested early, and now they might hold the Guelph Storm's playoff fate in there with a couple of games coming up with the Storm this week. And can't be comfortable for the Storm knowing you got to beat the London Knights at least once, if not twice, to have any shot at the playoffs.
You mentioned, Dan, Zayne Parekh during the wraparound and his back-to-back 30-goal seasons. How about being in the same company now as Bobby Orr, as the only other OHL defenseman to have done that? That is an incredible statistic for Zayne Parekh.
It really is, Mike. And I think it's hard to put in perspective for a lot of fans who either haven't followed the league for a long time or just aren't familiar with how difficult it is to score 30 from the blue line. There's a few ways you can do it. You either need either way, you need an extremely good shot, obviously, whether that's a boomer or a sneaky wrister, kind of like Parekh likes to change his angle and get that shot from different looks and always hits the net. Always hit the net, kids. Number one tip. But to do it when you are a draft eligible 17-year-old is nearly impossible, because to get that kind of ice time when you're young is tough. He was on a championship caliber team. So you have to earn that ice time. You have to be reliable defending in order to get it. And then to follow it up the next year, all the components that go into that, you're drawing the heaviest checking. They're going to be all over you. They're going to be game planning you. You have to stay healthy. All these components that go into that, Mike, that's why you just said it, Bobby Orr, right? I mean, you're talking how rare it is to be able to do that. So, regardless of what you think of the all-around game, Zayne Parekh is one heck of an offensive defenseman. I'm sure Calgary is salivating.
Well, and you want to talk about rare. So now at 100 points on the season for Zayne Parekh, he's only the 10th OHL defenseman ever to do that. So in the same company as only Bobby Orr with back-to-back 30-goal seasons, one of only 10 OHL defensemen in history to record 100 points. And I'm going to use this as a bit of a mulligan for myself. After the draft last year, and you mentioned the Calgary Flames, I got invited by my buddies on Sportsnet 960, The Fan in Calgary, to come on the air and talk about Zayne Parekh. And I mentioned they wanted a comparable, and I don't like comparables, Dan. I just, I'm not a fan. But the first name that comes to mind, I'm like, I'll throw out Ryan Ellis for you. Like, and that's not like they're looking for. I don't pay enough attention to the current game, to be honest with you, but they were looking for something better, I think. But how about this? The last D in the OHL to put up a 100-point season, Ryan Ellis, 2010, 2011. So there you go, Sportsnet 960. I'm a man ahead of my time. So let's put it out there for you.
Yeah, and comparables are always so tough, right? Because someone's always going to take issue with some aspect that's not perfect, but they can't forget how good an offensive defenseman Ryan Ellis was in this league. I know he battled a lot of injuries, but yeah, think of Ryan Ellis when you think of that ability to find lanes with that shot and get it through to the net and just deadly from a bunch of angles. So I would say there's definitely validity in some comps there for sure.
You mentioned shake off that big loss to Brantford on the weekend, Dan. And of course, you're going to do that. The game's over, move on. I still think, Parekh, who we've just been spending time on, add Chernyshov, add Michael Misa. I think this Saginaw team, they are still the defending Memorial Cup champions. There's a lot of pride in that locker room. I think they're going to be really interesting in the playoffs in the West. I really do.
Yeah, well, yeah, and in the preseason, I think I had them third in the conference, so they're right around where I thought they'd be because of the talent when you come off a championship run. But how scary would they be, Mike, if they hadn't sold? Like Ethan Hayes, Joey Willis, Bishop, they moved out some really key veteran pieces. If you hang on to them, I don't even know that I'd say it'd be an upset run for them to streak through the playoffs. So they're doing it despite those. I know Chernyshov was quite an ad for the second half of the calendar year, but yeah, that's a team with all kinds of talent. So if they keep the puck out of the net, Mike, look out.
You had them third to start the season, and so that's right around where they're sitting fourth. I had them fifth. Can I also claim that's right around where they're sitting? Okay,
absolutely.
So we were both in the Saginaw Spirit ballpark this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We had them surrounded, Mike. We had the target surrounded.
Not to be confused with the Erie Seawolves ballpark, which is literally attached to the Erie Insurance Arena. I can't wait to go down there for a ball game this summer. I spend too much time down in Erie in the wintertime. I want to go back for some baseball in the summertime.
I'm always up for baseball games, and I would love to find out what a Seawolf is. So I'm in.
All right. We love baseball, but this is a hockey podcast, of course. And we've kind of had the running theme since we started this podcast, quite frankly, how much fun it is to watch the game at this level, see a Nick Lardis-like season with 70 goals, and to watch the players who will be in the NHL tomorrow. You can see them for 25 or 30 bucks today, or you can see them for 250 to 300 bucks tomorrow. It is our weekly prospects of the week. And Dan, I will turn to you to start us off.
Yeah, Mike, I'm looking to Oshawa this week, and my guy is Owen Griffin, a highly touted pick who took a little bit of time to find his footing in the league, and a guy whose talent level had a few teams trying to pry him out of Oshawa at the deadline. And we're starting to see why he wanted to stick around, be part of this run. 7 goals in the last 7 games for Griffin, Mike. Reminds me a little bit of a fellow playing down the road in Tyler Hopkins in Kingston. Similar type players, a lot of skill level, sneaky shot and finish. And as a 17-year-old, might be rising up those draft boards as well, but is probably going to be a big name player in this league in the next year or two.
Okay, Dan, I want you to get comfortable. I want you to brace yourself. I don't want you to be too shocked when I say this. Okay, are you ready?
Sure.
My prospect of the week is Owen Griffin. I said it earlier this episode. We don't Dan and I go back and forth with ideas. We don't discuss finer points of what we're going to be discussing. I'm with you. Owen Griffin's my guy for the reasons that you just mentioned. And here's the other thing. 2 things jump out. First of all, it was 6 points, I believe, as a rookie he put up, right? So he's made leaps and bounds, started this season well, a little bit of a lull, but the points he's producing of late, as you just mentioned. And this is a guy, Dan, that I look at as, despite his size, he's not afraid to go to the dirtier areas to go after that puck. And if you want to put up points in this league, as the head coach of the Kitchener Rangers told me this weekend, if you want a pizza, go to the pizzeria. If you want a goal, go to the net. You can't get either of those things, the goals or the points, without the puck. And Owen Griffin will go and get him on the ice.
Yeah, and when we get in the playoffs, we see it all the time, Mike, in the NHL, but it's often the top 6 that gets checked into the ground, and it's your depth guys that score. So I'm expecting Owen Griffin's a sneaky player that we'll see in the playoffs.
The playoffs are just around the corner. We can't wait. Couple more weeks of the regular season, and then off we go with the postseason, which promises to be so much fun. Our thanks to you once again for being a part of our OHL podcast journey. Don't forget to send us an email anytime, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Like, subscribe, leave a comment wherever you want to leave a comment. We'll interact. We love it. Talk about this game, discuss ideas. We're here for it. You'll find Dan on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm at Farwell_OHL, and we will both be back right here in 1 week's time on the OHL podcast.